Should you hack Pokémon? Video game magazines were a huge part of the gaming community until the internet took over some years ago. This was the only way to discover rumors about new games, strategy guides and reviews, but one of the main reasons we bought them was because we wanted to get an edge on the games we owned. One of the first examples I discovered was how to clone Pokémon in Pokémon Gold and Silver. This was incredibly useful because it would allow me to give away legendary and powerful Pokémon without losing them forever. My friends didn't have to know that, of course, and I would be able to complete my Pokédex faster than most players. To this day, I feel slightly guilty for having done that, and I'm not even taking into account the missing no glitch with infinite rare candies, vitamins, and PP ups. But the truth is that I wasn't harming anyone. I was doing it for fun, to get the most out of my game and experience it differently. Outside of these oversights, Pokémon has never been known for being a game where you can enter a password to get an advantage, such as the Konami code in Contra and other games. You must find exploits or glitches to skip doing stuff that can otherwise take days, months, or even years. What is hacking though? Well, according to dictionary.com, it refers to the replacement of a single course of stonework by two or more lower courses, which has nothing to do with what I mean. In all seriousness, it means modifying or manipulating a game using external tools, codes, or software to alter game data. So, what I did when I was a child with missing no and cloning Pokémon in Gold and Silver wouldn't fall into the category of hacking because I wasn't using external tools, but it's something that Nintendo wouldn't encourage players to do, especially considering how, when they acknowledged missing no's existence, they said performing the glitch could erase your save file. Does using cheating devices such as Game Shark and Game Genie count as hacking Pokémon? Not necessarily. You could use cheats to get rare candies or other items and use them on a legit Pokémon, and there's no way anybody could know that your Pokémon took advantage of these hacked objects. Nonetheless, you could enter a cheat code to encounter a wild Pokémon where you're not supposed to. Even if you level it up as intended, its location will expose it as what it is, a hacked Pokémon, no matter if you make that Pokémon appear in an intended location. The mere fact of using that external tool, as expected, makes it a hacked Pokémon. But one thing is to hack a Pokémon, and another is that people know you hacked one. Depending on your purpose, hacking Pokémon can be easy. If you want to break your game and beat it as fast as you can simply hack a Pokémon in your game with 999 in every single stat, and there you go. Have fun destroying every poor creature that has the misfortune of crossing your path. However, this video wouldn't exist if it weren't for another more controversial purpose I'll talk about later. In recent generations, Pokémon contain way more information than you think. Hacking a Pokémon implies knowing which Pokéballs you can catch it in, where to find them, at what levels, which moves it can learn, including egg moves that can or cannot be learned depending on the generation you catch them, among other things. There are too many variables, some of which are invisible in-game, such as the secret ID, which helps distinguish two Pokémon even if two players happen to have the same trainer ID. Oh, and be careful with shiny Pokémon in Generation 3, 4 and 5 for example, as shininess depends on a complex calculation based on the trainer ID number and secret ID number of the player who encounters it, as well as the personality value of the Pokémon. Additionally, I think these values are also linked to the nature and IVs of your Pokémon, so it would be complicated to make a competitive shiny Pokémon from those generations look legit. But generally speaking, hacking Pokémon can be an automated process, a quick way of saving hundreds of hours to have a competitive team of Pokémon. The most popular tools to make this possible are PKHex and PKSM, as they're equipped with tools that will tell you whether the Pokémon you're trying to make is legal in the eyes of the game. Let's take a moment to calculate how long it takes to create a competitively viable Pokémon. These Pokémon generally have perfect IVs and a specific moveset that can include egg moves that can only be obtained by breeding two particular species that know the moves in question. It depends on the generation and game you're trying to attempt this. For instance, in Pokémon Ruby, Sapphire and Emerald, it can take you around 6 minutes to hatch a single egg, although you can have the time in Emerald if you have a Pokémon with Flame Body or Magma Armor in your party. Now, you don't want any Pokémon, as what you're looking for is one with perfect IVs, or as close to perfect as possible. Considering a Pokémon has 6 stats, and each one has a 1 in 32 chance of being perfect, the odds of getting a Pokémon with perfect IVs is around 1 in a billion. It's true that when hatching a Pokémon, the baby will inherit 3 of the parent's IVs, but the other 3 will be generated randomly, meaning that even if the baby has perfect IVs in 3 stats, the odds of getting perfect IVs in the other 3 is about 1 in 32,000. What I mean is that it's time consuming to breed Pokémon, let alone competitive Pokémon in these generations. But let's return to 2025 and check what tools Game Freak has for us. First of all, we have Pokémon with guaranteed perfect IVs in at least 3 stats, such as the case of legendaries. We have the Destiny Knot, which guarantees that the offspring will inherit 5 out of 6 IVs from both parents. We also have the Everstone, an item that besides being an object that Mindy trolled us with when she traded her Hunter for our Medicham, it passes down the parent's nature. It's true that we need the parents to have good or perfect IVs in the first place, but compared to the conditions players had to deal with in older games, this is nothing. And also, many of us had access to those perfect shiny Ditto with different natures. Do you remember how I said that it takes around 6 minutes to hatch a single egg in Generation 3? In Gen 9, you can get a box full of eggs in a matter of minutes if you prepare a specific type of sandwich, and if you have a Pokémon with the fire abilities I mentioned, it takes around 34 seconds for a Pokémon egg to hatch. As if it weren't enough, by using the Masuda method, that is, if you hatch eggs when one of the parents originated in a game with a different language, your odds of hatching a shiny is 1 in 512 if combined with the shiny charm. It is an improvement compared to the old days without a doubt, an improvement that would deter players from hacking Pokémon, right? No. Consider the fact that we're not even taking into account the time it takes to earn the effort values your Pokémon needs, or lose track of how you spread them across your Pokémon stats. Do you want to be able to survive that critical hit Ice Beam? Or maybe you're planning to outspeed your most common opponents. What about giving your Pokémon a completely different moveset? Now, multiply these variants by the number of competitive Pokémon out there for the different types of tournaments. Imagine dealing with all this but in Generation 3. It's understandable why players feel encouraged to hack Pokémon, especially having tools that will save them months or even years, and having competitive Pokémon in a matter of seconds. When it comes to hacking, we also have to talk about shiny Pokémon. Many of you know that the odds of encountering one can be as low as 1 in 8,192 in previous generations, or as high as 1 in 512. I wanted to get all shiny Paldean starters in Scarlet and Violet, and I would be lying if I said I wasn't successful, but it took me way longer than expected. This made me wonder, are there people who have achieved the incredible feat of having a shiny living dex? First of all, this is impossible because there are Pokémon that haven't been released as shiny, such as the case of Victini even after 15 years. If you look up shiny living dex on YouTube, you can find a couple of people who claim to have done this, and not only that, but also obtain every single form of certain Pokémon such as Unknown that has 28 different forms. This is where Occam's razor comes in handy. It suggests that when faced with 2 explanations, the simplest one with the fewest assumptions is usually correct. What is more likely to happen? That somebody spent tens of thousands of hours playing the lottery for every single Pokémon and their multiple forms, or that they hacked those Pokémon? Occam's razor shouldn't be taken as a law, because we know that there are incredible stories that nobody would ever believe until you're presented with evidence. But what I mean is that we should always be skeptical to a certain level. On top of this, not all shinies are made equal. You might have guaranteed shiny Pokémon such as Gyarados or Ponyta in Generation 2 and Legends Arceus respectively. On the other hand, we have nightmarish shiny Pokémon such as the infamous Manaphy, a Pokémon that, if it were for Game Freak, would be shiny locked to this day, but an oversight forced them to bypass legality checks in Pokémon Home. For those unaware of why shiny Manaphy is infamous, let's picture this. Imagine that first of all, you need to finish Pokémon Ranger, something that can take up to 9 hours. Once you do it, you'll unlock an option called Ranger Net, where you have to introduce a code and then a password to unlock a mission called Recover the Precious Egg. You'll also have to complete this mission in order to be able to finally transfer the Manaphy egg to one of your Gen 4 Core Series games. You can try to hatch the egg just to discover that it will never be a shiny Manaphy because it's actually shiny locked. This happens because the game prevents shininess by using the trainer ID number and secret ID number of the first game that receives it. But if you trade this egg to a second main series game, given that these numbers will be different, it will no longer be shiny locked. However, this doesn't mean that it'll be an easy task. You can try to hatch the egg, and if it's not shiny, you can trade it back, delete the save file, and once you make it to the point where you can trade Pokemon, you can try to hatch the egg one more time. You can already see the problem with this. However, it's worth mentioning that there's a YouTuber by the name of Sonix who got several eggs from several copies, therefore increasing the chances of getting a shiny Manaphy, which he did. But you know what? Never mind, because some days ago, it was announced that you can get a legit shiny Manaphy if you complete the Sinnoh Pokédex for Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl inside Pokemon Home. My point remains, however, most shiny Pokemon are a lottery you might have to win more than 1,000 times to get a shiny living dex. Game Freak has definitely done a lot to make training Pokemon easier, and when I say a lot, I mean it, considering all the objects and mechanics it has introduced throughout the generations. However, they're aware that there has to be a balance between difficulty and zero effort. I once thought about the possibility of Game Freak giving participants the chance to create their own Pokemon before a tournament started, similar to the way Pokemon Stadium allowed you to choose rental Pokemon, but of course with the chance to spread EVs as they wish and choose moves for their Pokemon, even if they're egg moves, or choose whatever event Pokemon has been released with special moves, such as the V-Create Rayquaza. But there are two main problems with this. The first one is that it can discourage some players from buying the games. We know how important sales are for the gaming industry, and part of these sales go to the organization of events like these tournaments. The second issue is that players might lack a sense of connection with the teams they're playing with, and as a result, experience less of a sense of achievement when winning a battle with Pokemon that aren't truly theirs. Yes, our Pokemon might be bits of information, but in the same way that we could be attached to material possessions, we can also be attached to these creatures. Maybe because a friend of yours traded it to you, maybe because your Mewtwo reminds you of a moment you spent with your family while playing the game, or maybe because Pokemon in general reminds you of those gifts your mom and dad gave you when you were a kid, or perhaps your partner gives you those gifts nowadays. But now, the question that concerns the title of this video: should you hack Pokemon? I guess you can choose to hack Pokemon responsibly. What I mean is that if you want to hack Pokemon for your own amusement, you're completely free to do so. It's not exactly something that Nintendo would endorse, but nobody's gonna go after you if you get whatever Pokemon you want in the blink of an eye. I've done it and even showed footage of it. If you watch my Pokemon Colosseum retrospective, which probably you didn't because nobody cares about that video, you might have seen I had a shiny Mew. The fact that my Mew's name is not in Japanese exposes it for what it is, a hacked Pokemon. However, when it comes to competing with others, you should abide by the rules. Would you be okay to know that somebody who hacked their Pokemon took away your chance of advancing in a tournament? Do you think it's fair that there are people who invested hundreds of hours training their team to lose against somebody who doesn't respect the rules? If you were this person, would victory taste the same knowing that you won against somebody who maybe did the right thing? My advice is, don't do what you wouldn't want done to you. But what about those using hacked Pokemon to create legit ones? This is the infamous case of those shiny Ditto with perfect IVs most of us received or even bought in order to facilitate the process of hatching perfect Pokemon. Well, this might be a gray area. At least in the eyes of Nintendo and some Pokemon fans, no hacked Pokemon should be used at all, even if they're producing Pokemon that are legit themselves. As somebody on Reddit put it by comparing this situation to a cake decorating contest, hacked Pokemon are store-bought cakes, in which case you would be disqualified. Hacked parent Pokemon are a cake made with pre-made cake mix, legal since you are doing the decoration yourself. Pokemon with no hacks at all are like a cake made with the proper ingredients. Sure, they are all cakes, and the contest is about the decoration rather than the cake, but the last one is more impressive from a baking perspective than the second because of the extra effort put in. We know we can do it, and we know we can get away with it, but would you do it? I would love to hear what your take on this controversial topic is. Does it matter if players win with hacked Pokemon? Thank you so much for watching. I made an iceberg on Resident Evil 1 on the EisenBerg experience, so feel free to give it a chance. See you in the next one.